Live or pre-recorded?
Hello.
Live or pre-recorded? Okay, so it's going to go live. So if you do make a mistake, just carry on through it.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Ready. Hello, welcome back to Fintech Live London. I'm joined now by Aravind Narayan from Refinitiv, which was acquired by London Stock Exchange Group last year. Aravind, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me, first of all, sort of about the state of play in regards to regulations like AML and KYC? How difficult is that still for banks and financial institutions?
Yeah. So I think I touched on this today on stage as well. I think it's very disjointed at the moment. There are good regulators and good kind of guidance given by them, but it's not really fit for purpose for a global organization. And it makes it difficult where your customers are coming from, what are the type of rules they have to comply with. And I touched on sanctions, for example. It all started with just, stopping a terrorist from getting money to perform terrorist activities. From that, it has moved on to sectoral sanctions from against Chinese military companies or other indirect network sanctions. And then there is more around security sanctions as well, where a buy side firm is holding an asset like an ETF or a fund, and how do you know you're exposed to any sort of sanctions or not? So it's very just by taking sanctions alone, it's very different compared to other parts of the regulations. Now, if you look at ID verification, again, FATF, Wolfsburg, etc., are think tanks who publish guidances. It's up to the regulator to pick those guidances and post-mortem them and figure out how that's going to be implemented in their region. It may be European Union or the UK and parts of Asia, North America, etc. So the guidance is one thing, implementing that is another. So what bad actors are looking at is like they look at these kind of disjointed implementation and figure out, oh, there are loopholes that I could actually leverage and actually launder money through these, because you know what? For example, there are blacklisted and grey-listed countries who has got very weak anti-money laundering regulations and how they are implemented. So what they are thinking is, oh, I'm going to pump my money into that country, and then it slowly enters into the financial system. But there's nothing stopping for that bad actor from coming from that grey-listed, blacklisted country to a country like the UK or the Americas or parts of Asia. So that's the challenge I see in the near future, and it's not even mitigated now.
And of course, over the last 12 months, we've seen the picture in regards to sanctions become a lot more complicated.
Absolutely.
Does that make it more complex for companies to be compliant?
It is complex, but I would tell you this. It is super complex, right? But there are service providers like ourselves, like Refinitiv, for example. What we do is we have about 600 plus researchers who sit and digest these sanctions regulations day in, day out in various different countries across the world, and figuring out what does that mean to a business? What does that mean to a fintech? What does that mean to a corporate? So our teams are literally sitting down and figuring out different ways to digest this information and then sweep the internet and various lists published by regulator by OFAC and other sanctioned bodies to figure out how can they extract that list and put it into a database. So from my point of view, it's about, I don't want to say it like, oh, buy our data, you're going to be compliant, but that's what it is. I mean, there are reg techs out there who actually does this job for a living. For banks, it's about buying the right technology and the provider and then figuring out if that makes sense to them.
Consumers, of course, live their lives online. There are more data sources about them for verification purposes than there've ever been.
Yeah.
But are companies, are banks and institutions utilizing those data sources to their fullest?
Right. It's an interesting question. If I was building a bank today, I wouldn't go to these individual data sources like utility providers or like Thames Water database, right? or I'm going to electoral register in each of these countries. That can be very daunting to create separate connections to each of these data providers. Again, what I would do is go to an aggregator who has got already kind of pipes laid down in the form of APIs to all of these providers. I would go to this one person who can give me, okay, I'm going to type Aravind Narayan and lives in this address. Is that legit? And that kind of pings across different signals to all these databases, comes back and says, yes, he or she lives in this address. All good. You can onboard him without any problem. So there's a bit of that in terms of don't try to build it yourself because it's quite a difficult task. Come to providers who can help you.
And are there regional differences in sort of expectations or how consumers verify their ID?
Oh God, yes, it is again another world that it's very hard to kind of navigate purely because I think again I touched on this briefly, which was Germany has got video verification. Other parts of the world, like in Nordics, they have got a digital ID like NEM ID, bank ID, etc. And they don't need documents; they just need these digital IDs to verify themselves. Germany needs a video verification. When I say video, it's not even like moving your face against or smiling. It is actually scheduling a call with somebody as a physical agent on the other side and showing them your passport on a video. I mean, come on, that is so. I mean, it's like it's old school. So for me, I think there's very big regional differences, and I think there are ways to get over it or get around it. Again, back to the point about regulators trying to understand what other regulators are doing around the world and kind of streamlining this, because guidances are right now all over the place. You're a global fintech, you want to onboard customers in Germany, France, and Sweden. There's are three different types of data points that you want, and it becomes very difficult for expansion. So I think there's lots that can be done. One of the things that we do in the space is like, forget the document piece. We can give you identity data for a provider. So what we can do is like, again, type your name and your address, and it pings across that kind of database that's a trusted data source in that country, and comes back with the okay, yeah, this person lives in this address since this date. So if you get that information, I think that's good enough in my understanding to kind of say, yeah, that ID is verified. You don't need a passport. And I don't believe that is a way forward, and that's the future.
Things like KYC and AML, they are sort of regulatory minimums. They're the
Yeah.
very minimum that a company has to do.
Absolutely.
What can a company do to go above and beyond though?
What can a company goes above and beyond that?
Yeah, what can a company do? What can a fintech do to make sure that they're not just doing the regulatory minimums, but that they're really, really squeaky clean and doing the best that they can to make sure that they're compliant?
Yeah. So I think the companies who can really consider AML, KYC, screening, etc., as not a regulatory burden, but if I think about it, it's very simple. It's about that's your first impression. You come into your app, you open, you go through it. That's your first impression from a customer, and that's where they decide whether it's a trusted app or not, because they ask me the right type of questions to making sure that okay, you know what, I can trust them, because not every crook around the world is actually going to use the same way, because they're going to get caught. You want to kind of build that trust, and that's why I keep telling um, fintechs and other banks, right? Don't consider compliance as a cost center. You want to consider that into your strategy and build a solution around it, which is what I was talking to the guys around a little earlier, was embed compliance into your strategy. And once you embed compliance in your strategy, you start to see things around behavioral patterns of customers. So you want to see, you don't want to do KYC AML. Yeah, I did it at the time of onboarding. And what happens? Guess what? Aravind was killed, and somebody else took my name and stole my identity and acting as me now, synthetic ID. Okay, it's a bit gruesome, but you know what I mean. So you want to understand that you're constantly interacting with the same customer who you onboarded at the beginning, maybe 5 years ago. How would you do that? You want to build that behavioral patterns. You want to see why is Aravind sending a lot of money to Iran? That seems a bit weird. What's going on? So you want to kind of understand those patterns and figure out, is that the same Aravind that I onboarded back in 2017? So you want to kind of understand the customer journey, and that those insights are quite valuable to tell a regulator to say, hey, Mr. Regulator, this is how it happened, and you want to give some context to a regulator when you say this person is bad or this person is good, because regulator is going to turn around and say, okay, thanks for submitting this suspicious report, but what am I going to do with it? I don't know. You do whatever you have to do. But there is more insights if you, and this was told to me by a Canadian police law enforcement agent, where they are like, we get suspicious reports which are totally pointless and with no use, because all I get is a name, email ID, and a transaction ID. What am I going to do with it? Nothing. I have no idea of the context. But if you enrich that data and give them the right type of information, there's a lot more value we can derive out of this, and a lot more actionable insights for law enforcement to stop such a crime from happening. So yeah.
What do you see as the future of ID verification? Is it going to change?
It's definitely going to change. Digital ID data is going to stay, because at the end of the day, you have to verify somebody with their credentials and understand they live in that right address. But I'm not going to say it's 5 years time, but in the 10 years time, I'll be sitting here probably with you and telling you that, oh, passports are gone. How cool is that? We don't need passports anymore. And trust me, that's coming. And yes, there is geopolitical pressures for that to not happen. I'm not going to go into details of that, but technology-wise, there is definitely a change coming. And especially people talk about crypto, right? And I take things around, I could segment that apart and say, what drives crypto is the distributed ledger technology. You take that out and then try and apply that under blockchain technology. Take that and apply that to an ID verification world or a digital ID world. You suddenly have a consumer who has full control of their ID, and it's all digital. If you want to verify, go to a bar, the barman is only going to see, not, when they say alcohol and show me your ID, I want to check if you're 18. All they're going to see is you're 18 and above. That's it. Do they need to know your name, date of birth? No, not really. All they need to know to serve you alcohol is you are greater than 25 or whatever that regional restriction is. And that's the world we are moving in. You walk into a bar, that'll be one type of credentialing. You walk into a university, that'll be a different type of credentialing. You go apply for a job, you'll have a different kind of credentialing. So when you open a bank account, that's a different type of credentialing. So that is where I think the world is moving to, which is verifiable credentials, as I briefly mentioned on stage. So there's a lot of work happening in that space, and regulators are actively involved in that as well to understand where this is going. So one is definitely education, because regulators struggle to understand there's a value and what's the value, etc. So I think that's one thing that fintech community can bring to the table, is like, go to regulators, talk to them about what's out there in terms of technology. So that can make a big difference.
You've been much in demand so far. People are desperate to introduce themselves to you and meet you. How are you finding Fintech Live London?
I mean, I love it. It's a great event. I'm very excited to be, as I said to Scott on stage. Like last year, I remember speaking to Scott on video, and I'm so glad that we are doing face-to-face events again. I can't wait to come back to this stage again. Great venue. I mean, great speakers, and couldn't ask for more. It's amazing.
Well, it's great to have you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you very much.
We've got more great content to come, but from me and Aravind, thank you very much.